All right, y'all, even though I am not here in class with you today, you still get the opportunity to both hear my voice and also learn a little bit more about congressional advantages. Now, in the past few weeks, we've talked about the basics of Congress. We understand who is in these two houses in our bicameral legislature. We've also started to talk a little bit about what they are congressionally and constitutionally mandated to do, which is, of course, legislate. And we've also learned a little bit about how they spend a lot of their time, which is actually fundraising. And today we're going to see a little bit more about how those two actions that they are taking, how they come into play with each other, as well as sometimes bring some complicating factors. So, to understand that, we need to understand a couple more concepts and terms. So, first one is incumbents. What does it mean to be an incumbent? That is somebody who is already in office. I had mentioned this last week, but just so we're aware officially, an incumbent member of Congress is someone who is already holding that position. And right now, about 85 to 90% of our House and our Senate are made up of incumbents. These are people that are already in office. So, for example, our current representative, Kevin Mullen, he is an incumbent because he has held this position prior to this current term. He is running for re-election. He is running as an incumbent. When Alex Padilla runs in the future, he will be running as an incumbent. If Adam Schiff or Steve Garvey, these are the two members that are running to be your other senator in California right now in November. If they choose to run again in what would be 2030, they will be running as incumbents. Now, why do we see so many incumbents in Congress, in our House and our Senate? And you can see here on this map the states that have the most incumbents. Why are they able to do this? Because they have a lot of advantages. And two we're going to talk about specifically today. Number one, they're raising campaign funds. They're able to use that franking, which remember, that's our free postage. So they're able to get their messages out more effectively than challengers. And because they have name recognition, because people are already aware of them, because they're more easily identifiable, that name recognition also helps them raise campaign funds. And we also know that they spend a lot of their time actually in Congress also calling up donors and raising campaign funds. Remember, our senators, they're doing this every 6 years, but our representatives, they're doing this every 2 years. So as soon as they're in office, they're already thinking about the next election cycle and how they can raise as much funds as possible so that way they have the most impressive advantage possible. Another factor that helps them with name recognition is that voters feel indebted. They're using these mailers, they're using this information to say, hey, look what I did for you. So right now, as we are fully in our campaign season, one of the messaging that we're hearing a lot is these are what the senators, these are what the representatives, these are the bills that they've gotten passed, these are the legislative actions that they've taken to help their constituents. They are trying to really spin that message as much as possible because the more that they can make someone feel indebted to them, the more likely that person will vote for them again. So they're really utilizing that. And then the final factor that we'll get into greater detail throughout this lecture is gerrymandering of our districts, as we'll see what that means. Ooh, something to look forward to. All right, so just to give you a sense of who is in the House, who's in the Senate, if you look at this graph here on the right, you can see the re-election rates going back all the way to 1964, and you can see that they're really high, especially in the House. We see, I think our lowest numbers are in the mid 80s. So beyond that, you're seeing a lot of representatives getting reelected. There's a lot of people that have been in the House since those early years, not all the way back to 64, but we definitely have representatives that have been there since the late 20th century that have been serving for decades now. And you're seeing also very high rates in the Senate as well, all the way up to 97. I think our lowest in the Senate is 91%. So senators, once they're in that position, they are typically locked in until they choose to retire or something forces them out, but typically that's not going to be an election. And one of the factors that really helps them is the amount of money raised. So you can look here in the contributions on that graph to the left. The incumbents for the Republicans, they are making a ton of money. On the Democrats with the blue, they're also getting a lot. Now, if you look at the challengers, Republican challengers are not getting that much money. Democrats, you see more challengers getting money in the House. And when we look at the candidates, despite the fact that Republicans, they're not getting as much money, although we're still talking in the tens of millions here, Despite the fact that they're not getting that much money, there are still a lot of challengers to these seats. So these incumbents, these 221 in one of the more recent contests, they got a lot of money, which is what helped them maintain that high reelection rate. For the Democrats, it's a slightly different story. We see a lot more challengers, but despite the fact that they got more money, the incumbent rate is still pretty high for our Democrats. And just to give you an even greater sense of how much money we're really talking about. So in the House over here, we see our candidates. There's 405 incumbents that ran in 2022. On average, they're raising close to $3 million. Our challengers, despite there being over 1,200 challengers to these seats, their average was only about 300,000. So I can't even do the math there, but so much less the incumbent, or I'm sorry, so much less that the challengers were making on average to the incumbents, which is why we saw so many incumbents still in that position. In the Senate here, we're seeing even more money. Average raise for the incumbent Senate seat is close to $30 million. That's not a typo. These are both commas here. $30 million. The average raised on the challengers for the Senate, that's almost as much as what the incumbents are raising on average for the House, more than $2 million. So just wild amounts of money that are being spent. This year, the 2024 election is on track to be the most expensive campaign that we've seen in history as more money is flooding in. Where's this money coming from? It's coming from the representatives, the incumbents and the challengers themselves, as well as from political action committees that we'll learn about, as well as donors. Lots of donors, and they are really talking to their wealthiest donors, which means that these wealthiest donors, they have now an advantage because they have the ear of these candidates. And this now becomes a tricky partnership because donors can say, hey, remember, we got you in your seat. We want to keep you in your seat. And that means you want to be listening to us. And sometimes these wealthiest donors, what they want, what they need is not always at the same, can be in contradiction to what the masses of the rest of the constituents are in need of. And this is one of the reasons, again, why we see a lot of complaints and frustrations about Congress, about our government. Now, am I telling you this so you too can feel frustrated and cynical? Yes, and through awareness, by knowing about these things, by calling it out, by calling it into question, by advocating for other laws to be implemented, other practices to be in place. Just because this is how it has happened does not mean it's how it needs to happen. So the more we are aware of this, the more we call it into question, the more changes we can see to the system, and you are part of that change. Okay, let's talk about the other factor that really helps our incumbents get into these positions. Not only are we seeing the massive amount of wealth that's going into the campaigns, especially with our incumbents, but the other thing that's happening is actually where these districts actually are. And we're now talking about the House, the Senate. The Senate lines are drawn because they are based off the state. No matter what, no matter how the population moves within the states, you're still always going to get 2 senators. In the House, we see some changes. Every 10 years, we take a census. So you might have remembered this in 2020, that literally people come to homes or they reach out to every home, every community, and they literally ask information like who is living in this house, what are their ages, what are their professions, what are their genders, what are their forms of education, what languages are they speaking, etc. And through this information that was begun all the way back in 1790, this is how our government gets a sense of who is in the country. When we think back to popular sovereignty, this is one element of that. Because when people are at the center, knowing who the people are, what their needs are, is going to help drive our government. So every 10 years, we take a census. This gives us our population and a lot of demographic information. This also is going to influence how our House is distributed. Because remember, the House is distributed based on populations within the states. So as state populations change, the House is going to redistribute those 435 seats. So if you remember, or if you want to glance over at our election map that we have on that western wall in the classroom, you'll see both the numbers, and then you'll also see some numbers that are indicating changes. So for example, in 2010, California, our population was a bit larger than in 2020. We went from having 53 seats in the House of Representatives to now we're down to 52 because our population has shifted a bit. Texas has grown, and you can see here on this map that the states that are in darkest green there, nice little teal green. These are states that have grown the most, and then the states that are in the yellow, these are states that have lost their population. So not only does that mean that there's fewer people in those states, it also means that they are potentially having fewer representatives in the states. Now, obviously, states that are having a population that is so small that they only have one representative, even if their state's populations get even smaller, they're still going to have that one representative because you can't have less than one. You have to have a positive number of representatives. Fun fact about math. Okay, so the states redraw, right? They have to or reaccount for the fact that we have new districts. In California, we went from 53 to 52 districts. So what does that mean? Do we just erase one district and then the people that live there, even the people that are still there, that now we've just drawn straws and there's one district that no longer has representation? No, you have to redraw the boundaries to accommodate for this change. In Texas, they gain more districts. So do we just suddenly make Texas larger so that way there can be another district? No, they're going to have to redraw the boundaries. They have to go from, I'm going to make up a number here because I don't remember off the top of my head, but if Texas went from 20 to 22 districts, please feel free to look at the map to tell me if my math is correct. They're going to have to redraw the boundaries to accommodate to have more districts. So what is this called? This is called gerrymandering. Now, where did this name come from? It's not from our friend Jerry in our classroom. It's actually from a man named Elbridge Gerry. Gerry was his last name. In the late 1700s, who drew a pretty wild map of Massachusetts with a number of districts here. And he was like, hey, I know, let's make this one district over here with this western part of Massachusetts that he said, I'm going to take the western part here and also this random northern part because he wanted them to be included as well. And everyone said, Jerry, you be wildin'. This is very silly. They drew it like this weird little salamander dragon guy here. And they said because it looked kind of like a salamander and because his name was Jerry, they called it gerrymandering. What a fun portmanteau. Oh, those people back in the 1700s, they were wildin'. So when a state has to redraw their district boundaries, the state, the majority party that's in power, so in California, the Democrats were in power, they redrew the boundaries. In Texas, the Republicans were in power, they redrew the boundaries. And they're going to redraw these boundaries to address a loss or an addition of the districts in the state. So California, we had to go from 53 districts down to 52. So the Democrats, they had to redraw the boundaries. Texas, they went from whatever number it was to whatever number, and they had to redraw the boundaries. Now, are they going to do this to be totally fair and equal and think about all the constituents' needs? No, of course not. This is a partisan action. They are going to redraw these districts to favor their parties in power. And how are they going to do this? They're going to either pack the districts or they're going to crack the districts. So what does this mean? It means that they might take the opposition population and pack these populations into as few districts as possible. So if you have a bunch of Democrats and you're in a Republican state, you might want to say, all right, we're going to pack all these districts in and we're going to make as few districts as possible. Because if we have a state where there's 20 districts and 3 of them are Democrats and we can keep the other 17 for Republicans, you now have a very heavily Republican majority state and that benefits you. Same thing for the Democrats. They could pack in their opposition so that way they can guarantee to have as many Democrat states as possible. Don't worry, we're going to watch a video at the end of this lecture that explains this in greater detail. So if you're thinking yourself, Ms. Deb, this doesn't make sense, don't worry, we're going to keep learning about this. So packing by concentrating your opposition into few districts, that's one way. Or you can crack your opposition where you spread them out so that way they are the minority in multiple districts. So you could say, all right, we're going to take one population and we're going to now make them be the minority as part of District 1. We're going to crack apart another population. We're going to make the district minority in District 2, District 3, District 4. Now they're the minorities, which means they can vote, but they're never going to be able to have their representative be elected because they will always be outnumbered by your political party. And what does this look like? It ends up becoming wild. So you have, for example, the 12th district here. This is one district where you took I believe it was going to be Democrats because we're in North Carolina, and they basically packed them into this one random district going all the way from this city in the bottom all the way to almost to the northern part of the state. You have this in District 12 or District 2 for giving you a nice little Republican because Houston is a hugely majority, actually, it's not super majority Democrat, but they have a larger Democratic base. So what do? They split up the Democratic base into this other district. So then they lost out on having their majority opposition, and this turned into a red district, even though it is around a very Democratic base. Now, Congressional District 4, this is one of the most wild ones. You have the major city of Chicago here, as well as the Chicago suburbs. And what did they do? They took District 4 and they said, you know what, we're going to include West Fullerton and I-90 over here, but we're also going to get a little bit of Elmwood Park, a little bit of Moses Park. We're going to go all the way west to 294, and then we're going to wrap around and go all the way down here to Cicero. And this is one whole district. It is wild. And why do they do this? To benefit their parties in power. This does not serve the people, because if you are in a district here and you live here, but you are also needing to account for the needs of the people up here and the people all the way over here, you're not going to be served. Your representative, he doesn't know you. Our representative, Kevin Mullen, he's down the road from us, right? He's representing San Mateo, this part of the peninsula. It is one central area. Our needs are relatively the same. It is also easy for us to get to our representative because he is centrally located, because our district is normally drawn. For the people here in North Carolina, if their representative lives down here in this city, but they live all the way up in the northern part of the city, they're not having access. They're not getting a sense. Their representative is not going to be able to hear from them very easily. So this undermines popular sovereignty. This undermines one of the values and principles that our government was created upon. And if you're thinking to yourself, how does this happen? The system is not broken. It is working as intended. The people in power created this system to benefit themselves, and they are still benefiting from it, which is why it is being perpetuated. Now, again, how can we change this? The first step is knowing about this, calling it out, shining a light on it. There are ways that this can be addressed. Laws can be passed. And you are starting to see challenges to this. There have been some gerrymandered districts that have been called into question that have already gone up to the Supreme Court to uphold or to deny. So more of that needs to happen as people say, this is undermining my constitutionally mandated rights of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, etc., etc. So here's some more examples where you see some of these really wild districts. Here's the 3rd, the 4th, Texas, Louisiana, Illinois. And what ends up happening here, the way that it really comes out in Michigan, you had a votes where it was 48 red, 51 blue. So 48 to the Democrats, almost 52 to the, 48% of the Republicans and 52% to the Democrats. But the way that the district was drawn, it ended up being a guaranteed seat for the Republicans. We saw that in North Carolina, in Pennsylvania, and most egregiously in Wisconsin, where the votes were about 48% to Republicans, 51.5% to the Democrats. But the way that they drew the boundaries, that you were getting 62% of seats ended up going to the Republicans and only 37% going up to the Democrats. That is incredibly problematic. So what are the effects of this? The party in power stays in power, and you get districts that are just created to be safely, and that there's no way to get around it. That you end up with these odd-shaped districts, some of which that are guaranteed no matter what you do, it's a Republican district or it's a Democratic district. I realize the safe safes, that is awkward. That should just be safe districts created. Safe races, I believe, is probably what I meant there. And districts are created that you get these representatives that know that they are going to be reelected. They know even though they might not have the votes across the state, the way that the districts are created, that it's going to definitely go for the Democrats or go for the Republican. Notice you're only hearing me talk about these two political parties. This makes it more difficult for third-party candidates to run in congressional districts because the districts are drawn to, again, support the party that is already in power. And we also see effects of this that, especially in areas where there have been evidences of racial discrimination, that gerrymandering works against that as well. That's one aspect that you have seen some movement when you can prove that that districts have been gerrymandered based off of the exclusion of one race or at the expense of a race in our society or in our country. That is one time that you have seen the Supreme Court and state courts that have been able to strike down these gerrymandered districts. So that is a benefit to that. All right, enough of me talking. Let's learn a little bit more. I like this video. It's not saying one side is right, one side is wrong. It uses jackalopes and buffaloes, I believe, and it does a really good job of showing how gerrymandering happens and how you can see packing and cracking actually go into place. So let's watch this video together, shall we?
Queen Lion of the Animal Kingdom is giving more democracy to her citizens by adding a legislative branch to the government. The citizens each get one vote and are divided into ranges. Each range will elect one representative to send to the newly created Jungle Council. To best understand how the system works, let's take a look at a small colony where there are just two political parties, the Buffalo and Jackalope. This colony is divided into 4 ranges. In the first election, Jackalope candidates win 2 of them and Buffalo candidates win the rest. All is well for several election cycles until the Animal Kingdom census taker comes round and shows that the population has both moved and grown. To better represent the larger population, a new seat is added to the Jungle Council, so the range's boundaries must be redrawn. This is where the trouble begins. Redrawing electoral boundaries is a huge political problem. To help them, the representatives of the Jungle Council hire a Weasley consultant to figure out where the new boundaries should go. If Weasel draws rectangular boundaries, everything will be okay because the Jungle Council will, as close as possible, reflect how the citizens vote. However, Weasel doesn't do this. Instead, he tells the Buffalo Party that, for a price, he can turn their slim majority into a landslide victory in the election. With a supermajority on the Jungle Council, the Buffalo wouldn't have to listen to those pesky jackalope filibusters anymore, so the Buffalo gladly pay up. How can Weasel deliver on his promise? It's depressingly simple. By packing together as many jackalope voters into one range as possible and spreading the rest of them out, the Buffalo Party can win an additional seat without any voters switching allegiance. What Weasel and the Buffalo have done is called gerrymandering, the intentional changing of electoral boundaries for their benefit. Several election cycles later, the underrepresented and disgruntled Jackalope Party approaches Weasel and asks if he can manipulate the ranges to be in their favor instead of in the Buffalo's. Why, indeed he can. Using the same trick, Weasel packs Buffalo voters into a few ranges and spreads the rest among the Jackalope supporters. After the election, the Jackalopes, who represent a minority of voters, are now, nonetheless, the majority party on the Jungle Council. This is the terrible power of gerrymandering. Weasel can take the exact same voters and get either party to win the election. Unsurprisingly, Weasel's business grows, and eventually every colony in the Animal Kingdom pays him to gerrymander their ranges. With so many clients, Weasel now uses his computer to test hundreds of thousands of range combinations with elaborate statistical models of voter behavior to get the results he needs. Queen Lion has seen what Weasel is up to and banishes him from her kingdom. But the census taker reminds her that ranges still need to be redrawn as the population changes, so how is it going to be decided? Queen Lion suggests the obvious solution: a bipartisan committee must agree on all new range boundaries. This seems like a good idea. After all, if both parties have to agree on the ranges, then they must end up being fair to everyone. But after a few election cycles using this solution, Queen Lion notices that she always sees the same faces on the Jungle Council. Representatives almost never get defeated in their elections. It turns out that the interests of the representatives and the interests of the citizens are not the same. Citizens want elections where the candidates have to earn their vote. These are close elections where either candidate has a chance of winning. But representatives don't want close elections, they want safe elections. Elections where they run in a range that is filled with supporters. Because the representatives are in charge of the boundaries, they make the safest ranges possible. So bipartisan committees are not enough. To truly fix gerrymandering, there are 3 options. The first is to set up a politically independent commission of appointed experts or judges to draw the boundaries. Independent commissions are much better than bipartisan committees, but still not ideal because they usually group similar areas together, so the elections are uncompetitive. And there's always the possibility that the independent commission is not as independent as it appears. The second option is to let math decide the boundaries. There are a number of ways to mathematically divide an area into equally populous ranges. The simplest example of this is called the shortest split line method. Find the shortest line that splits the voters in twain and repeat as necessary until all the ranges are made. This is much better than an independent commission, but it does have the problem of occasionally producing skewed election results just through the pure bad luck of where the boundaries are drawn. But by publishing the algorithm used, all citizens can check the results and be confident that there is no intentional bias in the system. The last solution is an unexpected one. Hire back the weasel and embrace gerrymandering. But this time, pay him to make the winners most closely match the voters as a whole. While it seems unsavory, this is actually the best way to avoid disproportionate representation, which is, by far, the worst problem of gerrymandering. But considering these three solutions leaves Queen Lion grumpy. The first two are improvements, but still may result in uncompetitive elections or disproportionate results, while the third just feels wrong. Gerrymandering to avoid the problems of gerrymandering is odd. Remembering what she learned about voting before, she realizes that all this gerrymandering is really just a symptom of a more fundamental problem, the method by which each citizen gets only one vote and elects only one representative. There are ways to eliminate gerrymandering and restore competitive elections to make her citizens happy, but to do that, Queen Lion is going to have to make some big fundamental changes to her democracy.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that video. I think it does a good job of really showing how you can pack or crack and really mess with the elections just by how you draw the lines. It can determine whether or not one side or the other really gets in. And the other thing that I like about that is that it shows, shoot, I just forgot what I was going to say. So that it can be very frustrating about gerrymandering, but there are ways to work around it. I remember what else I was going to say. I also really like that it really illustrates again that the people that are in office, they like this because they want to have safe districts. They don't want to have to fight for your vote. But again, that undermines popular sovereignty. And we need to be advocating and demanding that they are listening to us. If we do not take a stand, if we do not challenge this sort of stuff, if we say my vote doesn't matter, whatever, I don't want to participate, that's what allows the system to perpetuate. But the more people that call that out, the more people that challenge that, the more it's going to force these elected officials to have to do things differently. So I want to encourage you to be mindful about that.